10 countries that Americans are not allowed to visit. There are several countries around the world where Americans may face restrictions or are not allowed to visit due to various reasons such as political tensions, safety concerns, or government policies. It is important for travelers to check the most up-to-date information from official sources before planning any international trips. Some of the countries that Americans are not allowed to visit or may face restrictions include: number 1, North Korea is one of the most restricted countries in the world, and Americans are generally not allowed to visit unless they obtain special permission from the North Korean government. The relationship between the United States and North Korea has been tense, and travel to North Korea is considered risky due to political tensions and human rights concerns. The U.S. Department of State strongly advises against travel to North Korea due to the serious risk of arrest and long-term detention under North Korea's system of law enforcement. Americans are generally not allowed to visit North Korea without special permission, which is rarely granted. North Korea is known for its oppressive regime, with severe restrictions on freedom of speech, movement, and access to information. The country has been widely criticized for its human rights record, including public executions, forced labor camps, and widespread poverty. The U.S. government urges its citizens to consider these factors when deciding to travel to North Korea. The United States government also has advised its citizens against traveling to North Korea due to the country's poor human rights record, unpredictable behavior of its leadership, and the potential for arrest and long-term detention of American citizens. The relationship between the U.S. and North Korea has been strained for decades due to political and military disagreement. The two countries have no formal diplomatic relations, and the U.S. government has a long-standing policy of restricting travel to North Korea. North Korea has a history of detaining American citizens for extended periods, often on trumped-up charges. These detentions can be used as political leverage, and the conditions of imprisonment are typically harsh and inhumane. The U.S. government has expressed concerns about the safety of its citizens in North Korea and therefore advises against all travel there. Number 2, Syria. Syria, due to ongoing civil unrest, violence, and political instability in Syria. The United States Department of State advises us citizens not to travel to Syria due to ongoing civil war, terrorism, and the unstable security situation. The U.S. government has limited ability to provide emergency services to us citizens in Syria, as us officials have limited ability to travel to the country. The U.S. State Department has issued a travel warning for Syria, which is currently at level 4, do not travel. This is the highest level advisory issued by the department. The warning advises us citizens not to travel to Syria due to the risks of kidnapping, terrorist attacks, and consular limitations. Consular limitations in Syria. As a result, the U.S. government has limited ability to provide emergency services to us citizens in Syria. The embassy's website states that it is unable to provide any consular services in the country. Terrorism threat in Syria. Syria is home to various terrorist groups, including ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and their affiliates. These groups have carried out numerous attacks throughout the country, targeting both civilians and military personnel. The U.S. government warns that U.S. citizens traveling or living in Syria may be at risk of being targeted by these groups. Civil war in Syria. Syria has been embroiled in a civil war since 2011, resulting in widespread violence and destruction throughout the country. The conflict has led to a significant humanitarian crisis, with millions of Syrians displaced from their homes and thousands killed or injured. The security situation remains unstable and volatile, with ongoing fighting between government forces and various opposition groups. Possible consequences for us citizens violating travel advisories. U.S. citizens who choose to travel to Syria, despite the travel advisory and warning, may face consequences upon their return to the United States. These consequences may include questioning or detention by us law enforcement agencies, as well as restrictions on future travel. Additionally, U.S. citizens who travel to Syria may be at risk of being targeted by terrorist groups or becoming involved in criminal activities. Number 3, Iran. Iran, the relationship between the United States and Iran has been strained for decades, leading to restrictions on American citizens traveling to Iran. While it is possible for Americans to visit Iran with a guided tour and a visa, the process is complex and travelers must adhere to strict rules and regulations. While Americans can travel to Iran, there are strict visa requirements and limitations on travel within the country. The relationship between the US and Iran has been strained and travelers may face scrutiny or difficulties during their stay. Geopolitical tensions. The relationship between the United States and Iran has been tense for several decades due to various political and ideological disagreements. This strained relationship is a significant factor in why Americans are not allowed to visit Iran as tourists. US government's travel advisory. The US Department of State has issued a level 4. Do not travel advisory for Iran due to the risk of kidnapping, arrest, and detention of US citizens. The unpredictable nature of the Iranian government's actions against American citizens has led to this strict advisory. Reciprocal restrictions. Iran does not grant tourist visas to American citizens as a reciprocal response to the US government's restrictions on Iranian visitors. The mutual denial of visitor access is an indirect consequence of ongoing diplomatic tensions between the two nations. Limited consular assistance. American citizens who decide to travel to Iran, despite official warnings, face significant challenges in obtaining consular assistance from the US government due to the limited diplomatic presence of the United States in Iran. The lack of adequate support further discourages American travel to the country. Arbitrary legal system. The potential for unfair treatment and extended detention in case of legal issues deters many Americans from visiting the country. Safety concerns for women travelers. Iran's societal norms, laws, and cultural practices pose unique challenges for female travelers, which may contribute to American travelers' reluctance to visit the country. Women traveling alone or without a male companion may face additional restrictions and scrutiny, while economic sanctions and tourism industry impact. The U.S. economic sanctions against Iran have significantly impacted its tourism industry, making it difficult for American travelers to find reliable and affordable services such as accommodations, transportation, and tour operators within the country. Furthermore, international banking restrictions make it challenging for Americans to handle financial transactions related to their travel expenses. Number 4, Cuba. While travel restrictions to Cuba have eased in recent years, there are still limitations on American citizens visiting the country. Americans can only travel to Cuba for specific purposes such as family visits, official government business, journalism, research, education, or religious activities. Do you Black Pot background on U.S.-Cuba relations? Americans traveling to Cuba stem from the complex history of relations between the United States and Cuba. Travel restrictions. Under the U.S. embargo, American citizens are prohibited from spending money in Cuba unless they have a specific license issued by the U.S. government. This restriction applies to tourist activities, making it illegal for Americans to visit Cuba for leisure purposes. The U.S. government has historically justified these restrictions as a means to pressure the Cuban government to improve its human rights record and move towards democracy. Changes in policy. In 2014, under the Obama administration, there was a significant shift in U.S. policy towards Cuba with the announcement of efforts to normalize diplomatic relations. This led to some relaxation of travel restrictions, allowing for certain categories of travel such as educational, cultural, religious, and people-to-people exchanges. Current situation. As of now, Americans are still subject to restrictions on traveling to Cuba for tourism purposes. They must fall under one of the approved categories of travel and comply with specific requirements set by the U.S. government. The situation remains fluid, with potential future changes depending on the political climate and diplomatic relations between the two countries. Number 5, Libya. Due to ongoing conflict and security concerns in Libya, the U.S. Department of State advises against all travel to the country. Americans are not allowed to visit Libya due to safety risks posed by terrorism, civil unrest, kidnapping, and crime. The U.S. and Libya have had a strained relationship for several years. The U.S. has not had an official embassy in Libya since 2014, when it was evacuated due to escalating violence. Since then, the U.S. has been representing its interests in Libya through the American Interest section of the Swiss Embassy. Travel warning and alert. The U.S. Department of State has issued a level 4 travel advisory for Libya, advising all Americans not to travel to the country due to crime, terrorism, civil unrest, and poor health infrastructure. The advisory warns of the risks of kidnapping, armed conflict, and potential targeting by terrorist groups operating in the region. Terrorism concerns? Libya has been a hotbed for terrorist activity, with several groups such as ISIS and Al-Qaeda operating within its borders. The ongoing instability and lack of a centralized government have made it difficult for authorities to maintain security and combat these threats effectively. The presence of these groups poses a significant risk to American citizens traveling in the country. Health infrastructure and COVID-19 pandemic. Libya's healthcare system is severely underdeveloped and lacks the necessary resources to handle medical emergencies, especially during the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. The Department of State advises Americans to avoid traveling to Libya due to the country's inadequate healthcare infrastructure and limited capacity to cope with large-scale health crises. Limited consular services. The absence of an official U.S. embassy in Libya has significantly impacted consular services for American citizens in the country. The limited availability of consular services further complicates travel plans and may hinder emergency assistance in case of an unforeseen crisis. Number 6, Yemen. Yemen is another country where Americans are not allowed to visit due to ongoing conflict, terrorism threats, kidnapping risks, and deteriorating security situation. The U.S. Department of State has issued a level 4 do not travel advisory for Yemen. Due to ongoing violence, terrorist activities, and civil unrest, Yemen is considered extremely dangerous for travelers, including Americans. The U.S. Department of State advises against all travel to Yemen. Yemen is currently under a level 4 do not travel advisory issued by the U.S. Department of State due to the ongoing conflict, terrorism, civil unrest, health risks, and other security concerns in the country. This advisory warns U.S. citizens against all travel to Yemen and advises those already in the country to depart immediately. The main reasons why Americans are not allowed to visit Yemen include: Yemen has been facing a protracted conflict since 2014 between Houthi rebels and the internationally recognized government, with involvement from regional powers. This conflict has led to widespread violence, including airstrikes, bombings, and armed clashes, making the country extremely dangerous for travelers. Terrorism threats. Yemen is also a haven for various terrorist groups, including Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, and ISIS. These groups have carried out attacks targeting both local and foreign interests, posing a significant risk to travelers in the country. The civil unrest and political instability. The political situation in Yemen is highly unstable, with frequent demonstrations, protests, and violent incidents occurring throughout the country. The lack of a functioning government and the presence of multiple armed groups further exacerbate the security risk for visitors. Yemen has also been facing significant health challenges, including outbreaks of diseases such as cholera and COVID-19. The country's healthcare system is severely strained, making it difficult for travelers to access adequate medical care in case of emergencies. Due to the combination of ongoing conflict, terrorism threats, civil unrest, and health risks, the U.S. Department of State advises against all travel to Yemen for American citizens. The Houthi rebels, also known as Ansar Allah, are a insurgent group based in Yemen. They have been involved in the Yemeni civil war since 2014 and have been fighting against the internationally recognized government of President Abdrabbah Mansour Hadi, who is supported by a Saudi-led coalition. As of 2024, the Houthi rebels continue to control significant parts of Yemen, including the capital Sana'a. They have been able to maintain their stronghold despite facing military offensives from the Saudi-led coalition and internal divisions within Yemen. The conflict has resulted in a humanitarian crisis, with millions of Yemenis suffering from food insecurity and lack of access to basic services. Various international actors, including the United Nations, have been involved in efforts to broker a peace deal between the warring parties in Yemen. However, achieving a lasting peace has proven challenging due to the complex nature of the conflict and the deep-rooted grievances between the different factions. The future prospects for the Houthi rebels in 2024 remain uncertain. While they've been able to withstand military pressure and maintain control over key territories, the ongoing conflict has taken a toll on the country and its people. The resolution of the conflict will likely require a comprehensive political solution that addresses the grievances of all parties involved. The relationship between Yemen and the United States has been complex and multifaceted over the years. The future of the relationship will likely be influenced by various factors, including political developments, security concerns, economic interests, and regional dynamics. The United States has had a long history of involvement in Yemen, particularly in the context of counterterrorism efforts and regional stability. The relationship between the two countries has been characterized by periods of cooperation and tension. Current situation. Currently, Yemen is facing a humanitarian crisis due to ongoing conflict with millions of people in need of assistance. The United States has been providing humanitarian aid to Yemen while also supporting efforts to find a political solution to the conflict. Future prospects, though, the future relationship between Yemen and the United States will likely depend on several key factors. Political stability. Yeah, the stability of Yemen's government and institutions will be crucial in determining the nature of its relationship with the United States. A stable government that can effectively address the country's challenges is more likely to engage positively with the U.S. Security concern. Given Yemen's strategic location near important shipping routes and its history as a haven for extremist groups, security concerns will continue to be a significant factor in shaping the relationship between Yemen and the United States. Cooperation on counterterrorism efforts will be essential. The United States' continued support for humanitarian efforts in Yemen will be important in fostering goodwill and cooperation between the two countries. Addressing the humanitarian crisis in Yemen is a shared priority for both nations. The broader regional dynamics, including relationships with other Gulf states, Iran, and international actors, will also influence the future relationship between Yemen and the United States. Balancing these relationships while pursuing mutual interests will be key. The future relationship between Yemen and the United States is likely to be shaped by a combination of political, security, economic, and humanitarian factors. Cooperation on addressing shared challenges while respecting each other's sovereignty and interests will be essential for fostering a positive and constructive relationship between the two countries. Number 7, Somalia. Somalia, due to widespread violence, terrorism, and piracy in Somalia, the U.S. Department of State advises against all travel to the country. Americans are not allowed to visit Somalia due to safety concerns. Reasons Americans are not allowed to visit Somalia. Travel advisory by the U.S. Department of State. The primary reason why Americans are not allowed to visit Somalia is due to the travel advisory issued by the U.S. Department of State. The U.S. Department of State has issued a Level 4 do not travel advisory for Somalia due to crime, terrorism, kidnapping. This advisory warns U.S. citizens against all travel to Somalia due to the high level of risk present in the country. Security concerns. Somalia has been plagued by instability, violence, and conflict for many years. The presence of terrorist groups such as Al-Shabaab poses a significant threat to the safety and security of travelers, including Americans. The ongoing conflict in Somalia has resulted in a lack of effective governance and law enforcement, making it a dangerous destination for foreign visitors. Kidnapping risk. Kidnappings for ransom are a common occurrence in Somalia, with both locals and foreigners being targeted. American citizens are at a particularly high risk of being kidnapped due to their nationality. The threat of kidnapping is further exacerbated by the presence of criminal gangs and terrorist organizations operating in the country. Somalia is known for its history of piracy. In the waters off its coast, pirates have targeted commercial vessels, including oil tankers and cargo ships, as well as private yachts. While the international community has taken measures to combat piracy in the region, the threat still exists, posing a risk to any travelers venturing near Somali waters. Due to the security situation in Somalia, the U.S. government has limited ability to provide consular assistance to American citizens in distress. In case of emergencies or incidents involving U.S. citizens in Somalia, the options for assistance are severely restricted, further underscoring the risks associated with traveling to the country. Americans are not allowed to visit Somalia primarily due to the high level of risk posed by crime, terrorism, kidnapping, piracy, and overall instability in the country. The U.S. Department of State's Level 4 travel advisory strongly advises against all travel to Somalia for safety reasons. Number 8, Venezuela. Number 8, Venezuela political unrest, crime, and shortages of basic necessities have led the U.S. Department of State to issue a Level 4 do not travel advisory for Venezuela. Americans face risks as they travel to Venezuela and are advised against visiting the country. Travel restrictions by the U.S. government. The U.S. Department of State has issued a Level 4 travel advisory for Venezuela, which is the highest level of warning advising U.S. citizens not to travel to the country due to crime, civil unrest, poor health infrastructure, and arbitrary arrest and detention of U.S. citizens. This advisory was issued in April 2019 and remains in place as of the latest update. Venezuela has been experiencing a deep political and economic crisis for several years. The country has faced hyperinflation, shortages of food and medicine, and widespread protests against the government of President Nicolas Maduro. The political instability and social unrest have created a volatile environment that poses risks to travelers, including Americans. The U.S. aims for Americans. The U.S. government has expressed concerns about the safety and security of American citizens in Venezuela. There have been reports of violent crime, including armed robbery, kidnapping, and carjacking in various parts of the country. Additionally, the political tensions and anti-American sentiment in some segments of Venezuelan society could potentially put U.S. travelers at risk. Number 9, Eritrea. Eritrea is another country where Americans face significant travel restrictions and safety concerns. The U.S. Department of State advises against all travel to Eritrea due to limited consular assistance and the unpredictable security situation. Why Americans are not allowed to visit Eritrea are restrictions. Eritrea is a country located in the Horn of Africa, known for its unique history and culture. The Eritrean government has strict regulations regarding who can enter the country, including restrictions on American citizens. These restrictions are primarily due to political tensions and historical conflicts between the United States and Eritrea. Political tensions and historical context of the relationship between the United States and Eritrea has been strained over the years due to various factors. Eritrea gained independence from Ethiopia in 1991 after a long and bloody war, which was supported by the United States. However, relations soured in the following years due to disagreements over human rights issues, regional conflicts, and accusations of Eritrean support for terrorist groups, and title restrictions imposed by Eritrea. In response to these tensions, the Eritrean government has imposed travel restrictions on American citizens. This means that Americans are not allowed to visit Eritrea without special permission from the government. The restrictions are part of broader measures aimed at controlling foreign influence and maintaining national security. The impact on tourism and diplomatic relations, these travel restrictions have had a significant impact on tourism in Eritrea, as American tourists are unable to experience the country's rich cultural heritage and natural beauty. Furthermore, the restrictions have also strained diplomatic relations between the two countries, making it challenging to foster dialogue and cooperation on various issues. Americans are not allowed to visit Eritrea due to political tensions, historical conflicts, and travel restrictions imposed by the Eritrean government. These restrictions have implications for tourism and diplomatic relations between the two countries. Number 10, Turkmenistan. Turkmenistan Americans face challenges when trying to visit Turkmenistan due to strict visa requirements and limited consular services available in the country. While it is technically possible for Americans to visit Turkmenistan, it is not a common destination due to these restrictions. Reasons Americans are not allowed to visit Turkmenistan. Turkmenistan has strict visa regulations, and obtaining a visa to visit the country can be challenging for Americans. The government of Turkmenistan requires American citizens to apply for a visa in advance, and the process can be lengthy and complicated. Additionally, Turkmenistan has been known to deny visas to certain nationalities, including Americans, without providing a specific reason. Political tensions. There have been political tensions between the United States and Turkmenistan in the past, which may contribute to restrictions on American visitors. Diplomatic relations between the two countries have been strained at times, leading to limitations on travel for American citizens. Tourism infrastructure. Turkmenistan is not a popular tourist destination and has limited tourism infrastructure compared to other countries. The government may restrict access to certain nationalities, including Americans, in order to control the flow of tourists and maintain security within the country. The government of Turkmenistan has a restrictive visa policy with very few nationalities eligible for visa-free entry. Most visitors, including Americans, need to obtain a visa before traveling to Turkmenistan. However, the process of obtaining a visa can be challenging due to the limited number of embassies and consulates worldwide, as well as the strict requirements and application procedures. The relationship between Turkmenistan and the United States has been characterized by periods of tension and cooperation. While the two countries maintain diplomatic relations, there have been instances where political disagreements have affected travel policies. For example, in 2019, the United States government issued a travel advisory urging its citizens to reconsider traveling to Turkmenistan due to the country's restrictive foreign policies and censorship. Turkmenistan is known for its strict surveillance measures, limiting freedom of speech, association, and movement. The government closely monitors foreign visitors, including Americans, making many tourists hesitant to visit the country. Additionally, internal travel within Turkmenistan can be challenging due to limited transportation infrastructure and bureaucratic restrictions. Economic factors may also play a role in preventing Americans from visiting Turkmenistan. Due to economic sanctions imposed by international organizations such as the World Bank, IMF, and EBRD, international investment in Turkmenistan has been limited. Consequently, tourism infrastructure has not been significantly developed, making it less appealing for American tourists seeking comfort and convenience during their travels. Americans are not allowed to visit Turkmenistan primarily due to the country's strict visa policy and diplomatic relations with the United States. Additionally, concerns related to surveillance, limited freedom, and underdeveloped tourism infrastructure contribute to the restricted travel between the two nations. In 2024, the relationship between Turkmenistan and the United States of America is likely to be influenced by various factors, including political, economic, and strategic considerations. As of now, Turkmenistan and the United States maintain diplomatic relations, albeit with some challenges and differences in their approaches to certain global issues. Diplomatic relations between Turkmenistan and the United States have been established since Turkmenistan gained independence in 1991. The two countries have embassies in each other's capitals, Ashgabat and Washington, D.C., respectively. Diplomatic engagements between the two nations have focused on areas such as energy cooperation, security cooperation, and regional stability. Thanks for watching our video today. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more travel-related content.